Chapter 10 deals with vitamins. And let me say one comment about vitamins. In my opinion, it is the single most important topic for Step 1 boards. Because of all this integration with pathology, it deals with vitamin deficiencies and so on. But you must know the vitamins. The single most important topic for board exams. Of all those questions vignettes that you can anticipate being on board exams, you're likely to see at least one or more vitamin questions for boards. So you must master the vitamins. Now, of the vitamins, there are two classes of vitamins. There are the water-soluble vitamins and the fat-soluble vitamins. The fat-soluble vitamins will go into detail coming up a little bit later in this chapter, but the water-soluble vitamins will be discussed in a nutshell. What I want to do with the water-soluble vitamins in this table is highlight the difference between the vitamin and the coenzyme form made from the vitamin. Enzymes don't use vitamins. They use the coenzyme form of the vitamin. So I want to highlight the difference between the vitamin and the coenzyme form, and then also stress one word in terms of what that vitamin does in the human body, and then also highlight an issue of the deficiency in pathology. What do you want to see in terms of a vignette if it's a particular vitamin being deficient? What kind of hallmark or clinical manifestation when a particular vitamin is missing? Now, the first one to talk about here is biotin. Biotin is made into the coenzyme called biotinyl lysine. What biotinyl lysine is, as the coenzyme in the active site of three enzymes which use biotin. The enzymes are listed here, but in my opinion, don't worry about them now. You'll be concerned more about them later on in later chapters in metabolism. But there are three enzymes that require biotin to work, and in the active site of these enzymes is the amino acid lysine, and biotin is in covalent linkage to the lysine. That's the coenzyme form of biotin, biotinyl lysine. And it's involved in carboxylation reaction, the putting on of CO2 on a substrate to make a product. Deficiencies of biotin are relatively rare. And where you might see it are people eating raw eggs almost exclusively, because in raw eggs and egg white there is a protein called avidin which binds biotin very tightly and prevents the biotin from being absorbed. If there's a clinical manifestation that goes on with biotin deficiency, what you want to look for is alopecia, hair loss, characteristic of biotin deficiency. The next vitamin to discuss is thiamine, a major vitamin for the National Board. Don't be too concerned about the B number, B1, and so on. Just know it as thiamine. Thiamine is the vitamin made into the coenzyme called thiamine pyrophosphate. There are several enzymes in the human body that require thiamine pyrophosphate. All these enzymes are high-yield enzymes for boards discussed in metabolism. What thiamine pyrophosphate is involved in is in decarboxylation reactions, the removal of CO2 from a substrate to make a product. Thiamine deficiencies are fairly common in human beings, giving rise to beriberi, wet beriberi, and dry beriberi. Beriberi has many clinical manifestations, but in my opinion, the easy way to remember the difference between dry and wet beriberi, dry beriberi is a neurological problem, wet beriberi is a cardiac problem. They have other clinical manifestations, but that's the easiest way to remember the difference between wet and dry beriberi, neurological versus cardiac. They also have clinical characteristics of Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, the ataxia, psychosis, the confusion that goes on with thiamine deficiency. Alcoholism can cause thiamine deficiency, and the reason is because alcohol inhibits thiamine absorption, and there's very little thiamine in alcoholic beverages. So a person who is an alcoholic has a tendency to be thiamine deficient. Niacin is the vitamin made into the coenzyme NAD, another coenzyme called NADP. Let me stress, these two coenzymes are not the same. The class of enzymes that use NAD or NADP are called dehydrogenases, and they are specific dehydrogenases. They either use NAD or NADP. They are not interchangeable coenzymes. Now, what's NAD and NADP involved in? They're involved in oxidation reduction reactions in the human body, the movement of electrons from one molecule to another. Niacin deficiencies are well known, giving rise to the disorder called pellagra, characterized by the 4 Ds: diarrhea, dementia, dermatitis, and ultimately death. Another item about pellagra is the issue of tryptophan. Tryptophan, if you absorb tryptophan, tryptophan can be used to make niacin. Numbers you don't have to know, but for every 60 milligrams of tryptophan, you can make about 1 milligram of niacin. It turns out that's not enough niacin, therefore you have to get niacin from the diet. But the important feature is people who are tryptophan deficient. For example, people eating a lot of corn almost exclusively. Corn lacks tryptophan. And so people eating corn-based meals, this was a very serious problem in the United States in the early 1800s. People eating corn-based meals lack tryptophan, and they are very susceptible to pellagra because corn lacks tryptophan. Folic acid, in my opinion, is one of the 2 most important vitamins, water-soluble vitamins for the National Board. You're likely to see a folic acid question on boards, almost guarantee it. Folic acid is so very high yield, used to make the coenzyme called tetrahydrofolate, THF. THF is needed by a number of enzymes in pyrimidine and purine synthesis, and it's involved as a carrier of 1 carbon. As an example, the difference between uracil and thymine, the pyrimidines, uracil and thymine, the difference is a methyl group on uracil would form thymine. Where does the methyl group come from? Donation from THF carrier. Folic acid is important for many reasons in pathology. For example, in pregnancy, folic acid must be present very early in pregnancy, especially within the first few weeks of pregnancy, because that's where the neural tubes are being developed. And if folic acid is deficient, the neural tubes will not develop like they should and end up with the tragic neural tube defects in the fetus. But in adults, folic acid can be deficient because of a situation of alcoholics, also in pregnancy in a pregnant woman, female, but gives rise to many clinical manifestations, including homocystinemia, but the main characteristic is megaloblastic anemia, where the red cells look massive in size. Cyanocobalamin, vitamin B12, is the second high-yield vitamin for the National Board exams. In my opinion, folic acid and B12 are comparable in terms of importance for board exams. Cyanocobalamin B12 is used to make the coenzymes called methylcobalamin and deoxyadenylcobalamin. What happens there is B12 is made by the bacterial flora as cyanocobalamin. After the absorption with intrinsic factor, the cyanocobalamin, the cyano group is removed and replaced enzymatically with methyl or deoxyadenosine to form the coenzyme form of B12. There are only 2 enzymes in the human body that require the coenzyme form of B12. And B12 is needed to make methionine, used to deal with valine, methionine, besides methionine, valine, isoleucine, threonine, and odd-chain carbon fatty acids. Now, why is B12 so important for boards? And the reason is because there's a lot of pathology associated with it. The 2 major characteristics of B12 deficiency in pathology is megaloblastic anemia and the progressive peripheral neuropathy, where the fingers and the toes have a tingling sensation, and this usually happens in elderly. On board exams, if they talk about an elderly individual who has neurological tingling of the fingers, automatically think that this could be asking me about B12. B6, pyridoxine, is the vitamin used to make the coenzyme called pyridoxal phosphate. Notice the suffix Al, pyridoxal phosphate. The Al is an aldehyde group, and it's used to bind to amino groups. So if you were asked what pathway might you see a lot of pyridoxal phosphate being involved in, one among many pathways where pyridoxal phosphate is involved is in transamination reactions that go on in amino acid metabolism. So lots of amino acids, when they're being metabolized, the enzymes in those pathways require pyridoxal phosphate because the aldehyde groups react with amino groups in amino acid metabolism. You also see it in heme synthesis. Now B6, you need to know it because of integration with pharmacology and microbiology, because isoniazid in the treatment of tuberculosis, isoniazid binds B6 and a person can end up with B6 deficiency with somebody undergoing isoniazid therapy. In pathology, the hallmarks of B6 deficiency, sideroblastic anemia, chylosis, lots of characteristics, but sideroblastic anemia is one of the most important features of B6 deficiency. The idea there is iron, it will stay in the mitochondria. The mitochondria now will line the nucleus, giving rise to the sideroblastic anemia. The riboflavin B2. Again, don't worry or be concerned with the B number with riboflavin. Just know it as riboflavin, but it's used to make the coenzyme called FAD. One of the important features of riboflavin is that it's light sensitive. So if someone were to go to the store and get a bottle of multivitamin pills, it's in an opaque bottle, and the reason is because riboflavin, look at the suffix, flavin, aromatic rings. Riboflavin absorbs light, and riboflavin can degrade because it's very light sensitive. There are a number of enzymes that use FAD, and these are also classified as dehydrogenases, just like NAD or NADP coming from niacin. But these dehydrogenases use FAD. And if you were asked what's the function of FAD, it's involved in oxidation reduction reactions. Deficiencies of riboflavin are known, giving rise to chelosis or stomatitis. They also have a characteristic magenta colored tongue. They can also have a cracked tongue. But the idea of riboflavin, where might you see it on board exams? You might see it in the context of pediatrics, because some newborns who undergo phototherapy for the treatment of bilirubin problems, some newborns are prone to having riboflavin deficiency. And the reason is because of the light dealing with the bilirubin. Riboflavin in the skin can absorb that light, and riboflavin can degrade. And if you're going to be a pediatrician, you must be aware that some newborns could be affected by riboflavin deficiency. And therefore, as a pediatrician, you'd be ready for riboflavin supplementation. Ascorbic acid, vitamin C. If you were asked what's the coenzyme form of vitamin C, that's a trick question, because vitamin C is the only water-soluble vitamin that's made as is. There is no coenzyme form of vitamin C. There are a number of enzymes that need vitamin C: protein hydroxylase, lysine hydroxylase in collagen synthesis, dopamine hydroxylase in catecholamine synthesis. So there are a number of enzymes that use vitamin C. If you were asked what's the function of vitamin C besides making collagen and the catecholamines, another major function of vitamin C is it's an antioxidant. There's a lot of free radicals that are being generated in the human body that we'll talk about a little bit later once we get to vitamin E, also an antioxidant. But the idea is you need vitamin C to detoxify the large amounts of free radicals being generated in the human body. Vitamin C deficiencies are very well known, giving rise to scurvy. Now, scurvy has two characteristics. One characteristic is they have the elastic skin. That has to do with collagen not being made properly, and the skin is hyperelastic. The other characteristic of vitamin C deficiency in scurvy is the bleeding gums. Now, in scurvy, what's causing the bleeding gums and what's causing the hyperelastic skin is because you can't hydroxylate proline and lysine by the respective hydroxylases, which require vitamin C. And so if they're not hydroxylated, then downstream there's an enzyme called lysyl oxidase that needs to see hydroxylysine, and lysyl oxidase requires copper to oxidize hydroxylysines to cause the collagen to cross-link. So the idea here is if there's no vitamin C, you're not going to make hydroxylysine in collagen. Therefore, lysyl hydroxylase will not work. Hydroxylysine will not be made, and then the enzyme lysoxidase, which requires copper, will not work, and therefore no cross-linking, therefore hyperelastic skin, and therefore you also end up with the bleeding gums. Has a lot to do with hematology. Is to set off the intrinsic coagulation cascade is collagen. If collagen is not made properly in scurvy, therefore the intrinsic coagulation cascade will not kick in properly, as well as platelets will also be affected at the site of the cut. That's what causes the hemorrhaging in scurvy, defective collagen. The last of the water-soluble vitamins is pantothenic acid, used to make the coenzyme called coenzyme A. There are many enzymes in the body that need coenzyme A, especially enzymes in fatty acid metabolism. So if you were asked what's the function of coenzyme A, you could say it's a carrier of fatty acid. But not just fatty acids, it's used to carry other things like HMG-CoA in cholesterol metabolism. But for the boards, pantothenic acid is not that important, even though it's essential for life. For the boards, it's not that important because pathologies associated with pantothenic acid are very rare, and so therefore they usually don't ask on boards about pantothenic acid as a particular vitamin.